I know. Even just saying those words out loud feels like I've crossed some invisible line. And yet, I'm here, talking to you. Because there are nights I can't sleep. Nights when silence eats me alive. And the only way I can breathe is to let these words escape into the world. Maybe if I tell my story, someone out there will understand what I've been through, or maybe you'll judge me. Either way, I don't care anymore. At this point, I need to speak. Let me start from the beginning, so you can understand who I am. My name doesn't matter, but what you should know is that I'm in my late 50s. I've lived most of my life in the same small town, where everybody knows everybody. I worked most of my years as a carpenter, building furniture for neighbors and taking odd jobs when the money was tight. My life was never glamorous, but it was steady, reliable, and simple. I married my wife when I was barely 22. We've been together through thick and thin, raising one son. He grew up fast, left for college, then found a good job in the city. He's always been ambitious, wanting more than the quiet life his parents had. I was proud of him for that. He got married a few years ago to a woman he met at work. She was polite, respectful, the kind of daughter-in-law any man would hope for. At first, I was just grateful my son had someone kind to share his life with. If you had told me then that she and I would ever share a moment that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about myself, I would have laughed in your face. That sort of thing doesn't happen to people like me, ordinary men, quiet men, men who spend their lives behind wooden doors and sawdust. And yet, here I am. To be clear, I didn't seek any of this. I didn't go looking for trouble, and I certainly didn't imagine I'd ever tell the world what I'm about to tell you. But life has a way of testing you when you least expect it. It puts you in situations where the choices you make define you. Not the kind of man you say you are, but the kind of man you really are. Deep down, maybe that's why I feel so shaken. Because when my daughter-in-law came to me for advice, I thought I was just going to be the father figure, the steady hand, the voice of reason, but in her eyes that night, I saw something I wasn't prepared for. Before I get to that moment, though, let me paint the picture of who I was and the life I had, because without that, you won't understand why her words cut through me like a blade. Like I said, I'm in my late 50s. My body aches more than it used to. My hair is thinner, my hands rougher. My wife, bless her heart, has been by my side for decades. But we've grown into quiet routines. We don't talk much anymore, not the way we used to. We eat dinner together, we watch television, we go to bed, and that's about it. Comfort, yes, but passion? I never complained. This is what marriage becomes after years, right? That's what I told myself. That's what men my age tell each other when we gather at the cafe or sit outside the hardware store sipping coffee. We shrug, we laugh, we talk about old times, and we accept it. But deep down, there's a loneliness that gnaws at you. You don't admit it to anyone, not even yourself. You push it down, you distract yourself with work, with chores, with anything that keeps your mind from wandering. And then she came into my life, my daughter-in-law. I didn't notice much at first. She was just my son's wife, and I treated her with the respect she deserved. But she has this presence. She carries herself with grace. Yet there's always something in her eyes, something restless, like she's searching for something she hasn't found yet. She talks to me more than my own son does sometimes, maybe because he's busy, always on the phone, always rushing from one deadline to another. She, on the other hand, lingers. She'll sit on the porch with me, asking about my day, about my thoughts, about my past. I can't remember the last time someone cared enough to ask me questions like that. Not in years. It was flattering, I admit. Dangerous. Even though I didn't want to see it that way, I told myself she was just being polite, just trying to bond with her husband's family. Still, every time she looked at me with those curious eyes, I felt something stir inside me. Something I thought had long since died. And that's where this story begins. Not with passion, not with betrayal, not even with temptation, but with curiosity. Hers, and maybe mine too. One evening, when the house was quiet, she came to me with a question. An innocent one, at first. A question that opened a door I didn't know was even there. And from the moment she asked it, my world was never the same. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I promised I'd take this slow, that I'd tell you everything from the ground up. You see, when you're my age, you don't expect to be shaken anymore. You think life has already given you its surprises, and all that's left is the slow drift toward old age. But sometimes, one conversation, one question, can split your entire life into a before and an after. That night, sitting across from my daughter-in-law, hearing her voice tremble as she asked me something personal, I realized I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and once I looked down, there was no unseeing the drop. This is where my story truly begins. That evening is burned into my memory like a scar. It was late, later than she usually stayed up. My wife had already gone to bed, tired from a long day. My son was still away on a business trip, and the house felt unnaturally quiet. I was sitting in the living room, half watching the television but not really paying attention. The kind of half-silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. Then I heard soft footsteps. I turned my head, and there she was, my daughter-in-law. She stood hesitantly at the doorway, like she wasn't sure whether to come in or not. Her hair was loose, her face bare without makeup, and for the first time, she looked less like my son's wife, and more like just a young woman. Vulnerable. Human. "Can I sit with you, Dad?" she asked. I remember that moment clearly because it was the first time she called me Dad in such a soft, almost trembling voice. My throat tightened. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral, but inside, something shifted. She sat down across from me, folding her hands in her lap. She looked like she was struggling to find the right words, her eyes flicking toward me, then away. Finally, she exhaled, as if she had been holding her breath too long. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. I raised an eyebrow, more curious than concerned. "Of course," I replied. "You can ask me anything." She hesitated, then asked, "Dad, do you ever feel lonely?" The question hit me like a stone dropped into still water. I felt the ripples spread through my chest. Of all the things she could have asked me about marriage, about work, about my son, she asked about loneliness. I didn't answer right away. How could I? I'd spent years burying that feeling, pretending it didn't exist. And now, here it was, dragged into the open by the one person I should never share it with. "Why do you ask?" I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. She bit her lip, her eyes glistening in the dim light. "Because I feel it too. And I don't know who else I can talk to." I swear, in that instant, my heart skipped a beat. She looked at me, not as her father-in-law, not even as an elder she respected, but as someone who might understand her in a way no one else did. I wanted to tell her to stop, to go back to bed, to forget she had ever asked. But instead, I found myself leaning forward, lowering my voice. "Yes," I whispered, "I do feel lonely, more often than I'd like to admit." There it was, the truth. A truth I had never said aloud, not to my wife, not to my friends, not even to myself in the mirror. And yet, I said it to her. Her eyes widened slightly, as if my confession gave her permission to let her own walls down. She leaned back in her chair, her shoulders relaxing. For a moment, we just sat there in silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty but heavy, full of things unspoken. Then she spoke again. "Sometimes," she said, "I feel like your son doesn't really see me. He's always busy, always away, always on his phone. And when he is home, it's like I'm invisible." Her voice cracked. I felt a pang deep in my chest. She wasn't just talking to me, she was confiding in me, trusting me. I should have offered her comfort like a father would. I should have told her that marriage has ups and downs, that patience is key, that she wasn't alone. Instead, I just sat there, watching the way her hands trembled slightly, watching the way her lips pressed together, as if holding back tears. "You're not invisible," I said finally, my voice low. "At least, not to me." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and the moment they left my mouth, I knew I had crossed a line. She looked at me, then really looked. Her eyes locked onto mine, searching, questioning. I felt exposed, as though she could see every hidden thought I'd buried for years. And then she smiled, just faintly. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. That smile undid me. It wasn't seductive. It wasn't inappropriate. It was simply grateful, warm, and yet, it ignited something inside me that I had thought was long gone. We sat there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Eventually, she stood up, excused herself softly, and went back to her room. But I stayed awake long after, staring into the shadows, replaying her question in my mind. "Do you ever feel lonely?" Yes. Yes, I did. And now, for the first time, someone else knew. That night, something changed between us. I couldn't name it, couldn't define it, but I could feel it in the way the air seemed thicker when she walked into the room the next morning. I could feel it in the way I avoided her gaze at breakfast, in the way my heart betrayed me with every stolen glance. I told myself it was nothing, just a conversation, just two people sharing a vulnerable moment. But deep down, I knew better. That was the night the line blurred, the night I stopped being just a father-in-law and became something else entirely in her eyes. And maybe in mine too. And that was only the beginning. The days that followed were anything but ordinary. Though on the surface, nothing had changed. We still ate meals together at the same table. She still brewed tea for me in the evenings, sometimes lingering in the kitchen longer than necessary. We exchanged the same polite words in front of my wife, the same casual questions about errands or house chores. To anyone else, it was all perfectly normal. But beneath that thin layer of normalcy, something electric had begun to hum between us. I felt it in the way my chest tightened whenever she walked into the room. I noticed it in the subtle pauses when our eyes met for just a second too long. Even silence seemed louder when it was shared between us. Every little gesture became loaded with meaning. When she brushed past me in the hallway and her shoulder grazed mine, I felt the warmth of her skin linger long after. When she poured tea and slid the cup toward me, her fingers sometimes brushed against my knuckles accidental. Maybe. But my hand burned from the touch. I told myself I was imagining it, that she was just being kind, that I was reading too much into her words, her looks, her sighs. And yet, there were moments that made me question everything. One afternoon, I was repairing a loose cabinet door in the kitchen. She walked in, leaned against the counter, and watched me work. Normally, I don't like being watched. It makes me nervous. But with her, it was different. Her gaze wasn't critical. It was curious, attentive. She asked questions about my tools, about how I learned carpentry, and I found myself telling her stories from my youth that I hadn't shared in years. She laughed at the right moments, her laughter soft and genuine. When I stood up, wiping sweat from my brow, she handed me a towel. Our fingers touched again. Neither of us pulled away quickly. That pause, it was enough to send a shiver through me. Later that evening, when my wife had gone to bed, she sat on the porch swing beside me. We didn't speak much, just listened to the crickets outside. But then she said quietly, "I feel calmer when I talk to you." I swallowed hard. What could I say to that? The truth lodged in my throat. I feel the same way. Instead, I nodded, pretending not to understand the weight of her words, but my heart pounded, betraying me. From that night onward, every interaction carried unspoken layers. She began to seek me out more often, sometimes under the pretense of asking advice, sometimes just to sit in the same room. My wife didn't seem to notice she trusted us both, never questioning why her son's wife and her husband spent quiet evenings together. That trust cut me deeper than anything. I started noticing details I shouldn't have. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way her lips parted slightly when she was deep in thought. The way she chewed the inside of her cheek when she held back words. Each detail etched itself into me like carvings in wood. But it wasn't just me. She noticed me too. One morning, I was outside chopping wood. She came to bring me a glass of water. I thanked her, wiping sweat from my forehead. She tilted her head and said, "You work harder than men half your age." I laughed awkwardly, but inside, her words struck something raw. When was the last time someone had noticed me like that? Admired me? Not for being a provider or a father, but simply as a man? The line between us blurred further with each passing day, and with every blurred line came guilt that clawed at my insides. I began avoiding her, or at least trying to. I'd spend longer in the shed, pretend to be busy with odd jobs. But she always found a reason to come near. Once, she brought me coffee, insisting I take a break. Another time, she left a book on my workbench, saying she thought I might enjoy it. And then there was the night that nearly undid me. We were alone in the living room, the glow of the television casting soft shadows. My wife had gone upstairs. She sat beside me on the couch, not too close, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. For a while, we just watched in silence. Then she turned to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think I made a mistake? Marrying him?" My breath caught. My son, her husband. The man who should have been the one she turned to, the one she relied on. And yet, she was here, asking me. I wanted to say no, to reassure her, to defend my son. But when I looked at her, I saw the loneliness in her eyes, the same loneliness she had pointed out in me. I think, I began slowly. Sometimes two people can love each other and still feel alone. It doesn't mean it's a mistake. It just means something is missing. She studied me, her eyes searching mine. And what if that something can't be found with them? I froze. The air between us thickened, charged with something neither of us dared to name. In that moment, the tension was almost unbearable. I wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to close the gap. But I didn't. I couldn't. The risk was too great. Instead, I stood abruptly, muttering something about needing fresh air, and stepped outside into the night. My chest heaved as if I'd run a mile. Out there, under the stars, I told myself I had to end this. I had to pull back before something happened that could never be undone. But even as I swore to myself, deep down, I knew it was already too late. The seed had been planted. The tension had taken root, and no matter how hard I tried to bury it, it would keep growing, pushing its way to the surface. Because the truth was undeniable. I wanted her. And worse, I knew she wanted me too. I don't think I'll ever forget that night. It was a Friday, late enough that the rest of the house had gone quiet. My son was away for a business trip. My wife had taken an overnight bus to visit her sister, and it was just the two of us under the same roof. The silence was strange, too heavy, too loaded. I tried to keep myself busy, watching television, flipping through channels without caring what was on. But my mind wasn't in it. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, even the soft rustle of her footsteps upstairs. My heart seemed to anticipate something before my brain caught up. Around midnight, I heard her door open. Slow, tentative steps made their way down the staircase. I thought she'd head to the kitchen for water. But instead, she paused in the living room doorway. "Can't sleep?" I asked, pretending to sound casual, though my pulse was racing. She shook her head. I keep thinking too much." I muted the television. "What about?" She hesitated, then walked closer. The lamplight caught her face, soft, conflicted, almost vulnerable. About choices, about how sometimes life puts us in places we never expected to be. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to play the wise father-in-law, to offer words that would steer her back to safety. But instead, I found myself silent, trapped between responsibility and desire. And then she asked me the question that nearly broke me. "Do you ever wish things had been different for you? That you hadn't settled so early? Or that maybe someone else had noticed you in another way?" Her words sliced through me. It was as if she had read my private thoughts, the ones I had buried for years. My throat tightened. Yes. Sometimes. But those thoughts, they're dangerous." She sat down next to me, closer than she needed to. Dangerous doesn't always mean wrong. Sometimes it just means forbidden. That was the moment everything cracked. I could feel her warmth next to me, smell the faint scent of her shampoo, and for the first time in years, I felt noticed, desired, and that terrified me more than anything else. "Stop," I whispered. "You don't know what you're saying." But she looked me straight in the eyes. "I do. And I know what you're thinking too." The air between us thickened. 1,000 reasons screamed inside my head to get up, to walk away, to end the moment before it could spiral, but my body betrayed me. I stayed frozen, caught between morality and temptation. Finally, I managed to stand. My knees trembled, as if I'd just lifted something heavy. "You need to go back upstairs. Now." She looked hurt, but not surprised. "You're afraid." "Yes," I admitted, my voice breaking. "Afraid of destroying everything. Afraid of hurting people who don't deserve it. Afraid of losing myself." Her lips parted as if she wanted to say more, but she didn't. Instead, she rose quietly and walked back up the stairs. Each step echoed like a drumbeat in my chest. I sat there for hours, staring at the muted television screen, wrestling with the storm inside me. The line had been drawn, but it was so dangerously close to being crossed. The next morning, we acted like nothing had happened. She made breakfast, I pretended to read the newspaper, and neither of us acknowledged the night before. But the silence between us wasn't the same. It was heavier, sharper, charged with an unspoken truth we couldn't erase. That was the beginning of my torment. Because once a door like that is opened even slightly, you can never truly close it again. The morning after that night, life in the house seemed unchanged on the surface. The sun streamed through the kitchen window. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, and she moved about quietly, preparing breakfast like any other day. But beneath it all, there was a tremor, an invisible line that both of us knew had been crossed, even if no physical boundary had been. I sat at the table with the newspaper open, eyes skimming words I couldn't process. My mind replayed every detail of the night before. Her voice, her nearness, the way my chest had tightened with longing and fear at the same time. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the page. She placed a cup of coffee in front of me, and for a moment our fingers brushed. It was nothing an accident, something that had happened countless times before, but this time, it lingered in my veins like a jolt of electricity. I pulled my hand back too quickly, spilling a few drops onto the table. "Careful," she said softly, almost tenderly, and then she turned away before I could read her expression. I wanted to say something, to apologize for last night, or to set clear boundaries, or even just to acknowledge what had passed between us. But every word I thought of died in my throat. If I spoke, I feared it would make everything too real. And so, silence became my coward's refuge. That day, my son returned from his business trip. He came in smiling, tired but happy, and immediately wrapped his arms around her in a way that reminded me of the truth. She was his wife, his partner, not mine. Watching them together, guilt slammed into me like a tidal wave. The room blurred for a moment, and I excused myself before my son could notice the storm behind my eyes. From then on, I tried to create distance. I stayed later at work, found excuses to run errands, and avoided lingering in the same space with her whenever possible. But avoidance is a flimsy shield. No matter how hard I tried, her presence lingered in every corner of the house, her laughter drifting from the kitchen, her perfume clinging faintly in the hallway, her eyes meeting mine for just a second too long before looking away. It was torture, and yet, there was a twisted comfort in the torture. Because hidden in that ache was the proof that I wasn't invisible anymore. For years, I had moved through life like a shadow, a man playing his roles without passion, husband, father, provider. But now, someone had looked at me and seen something more. Someone had asked if I was lonely, and that question still echoed in me every night as I lay in bed beside my sleeping wife. Was I lonely? God, yes. And admitting it only deepened the wound. Weeks passed. The memory of that night didn't fade, but it grew heavier, like a stone I carried inside. I noticed her pulling back too, as if mirroring my attempts at distance. She was careful now, polite, almost cold at times, but every so often, I'd catch a flicker in her eyes, a softness, a sadness that told me the same battle raged inside her. One evening, as autumn crept in and the air turned crisp, she and I found ourselves alone again. My wife and son had stepped out together to buy groceries, leaving the two of us in the living room. The silence stretched like a wire ready to snap. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was steady, but her hands twisted in her lap. We can't keep this, whatever this island. It'll destroy everything." I swallowed hard. I know, but you feel it too, don't you?" she whispered, as if afraid of her own words. My chest ached. Every day. For a moment, neither of us moved. The confession hung between us like smoke, impossible to ignore, and then, just as quickly, she stood and walked away, leaving me with the hollow echo of her absence. That was the last time we ever spoke of it. Life went on. Family dinners, birthdays, holidays, all the ordinary moments continued, wrapping themselves around us like camouflage. To everyone else, we were nothing more than a normal family, bound by marriage and tradition. But beneath that surface, the secret pulsed quietly, invisible yet alive. And now, as I sit here telling you this story, I wonder if silence is its own kind of betrayal. Should I have confessed to someone? Should I have cut ties, moved away, built walls high enough that nothing could slip through? Or was it enough that we never crossed that final line, that we let the unspoken remain unspoken? I don't know. All I know is that a single question changed me forever. That night, when she looked at me and asked, "Do you ever feel lonely?" she cracked open a part of me I'd kept buried for decades. A part that can't be sealed again. I live with that question still. And maybe I'll carry it to my grave. Because sometimes, the most dangerous affairs aren't the ones that happen in secret rooms or behind closed doors. Sometimes, the most dangerous affairs are the ones that never fully happen at all. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest ending of all.